Hello again. My name is Vanessa Andreotti, and the session today is about peace education in relation to global education. I have to say that this is one of the most difficult sessions to put together because there's a lot of expectation that is placed on education to bring about peace in society. So I would like to start with that discussion in order to show you that today we're not going to have easy solutions to implement or fixed solutions to implement in the classroom or in society, but we're going to open up a debate about peace that shows how complex the issue is and shows even the limitations of education in addressing the issue of peace in the classroom and outside of the classroom. So in saying this, I'd like to say that the issue of peace is one of the most pressing issues, and it's one of the most difficult issues to deal with. So I'll start with the idea of the child soldier, for example, that represents violence and a very difficult situation, complex situation for us, especially in the West, to relate to. And the idea, on the other hand, of a rainbow and peace as the ultimate goal where we would like to take everybody to. And associated with these two ideas is the idea of knowledge, that there's so much ignorance out there in the world that creates the situation of the boy, and that with knowledge we can create a situation of peace and the dove and the rainbow. And this idea of knowledge versus ignorance is also associated with different things like pollution, other forms of violence, homelessness, destruction, and poverty as everything that is wrong in the world. And then with the idea of peace and the dove, there are other examples of what could be right in the world, ideas of a clean environment, of families happy, of children enjoying childhood, of the world getting together in order to create a better collective future for all. And then there's the idea that school is the vehicle from one space to the other. So from wrongness we get to rightness through education. And in this imagination, in this imaginary, the idea is that things are wrong because there's ignorance, and things can be made right through knowledge. Now, I would like to problematize this idea because a lot of the things that create the wrongs in the first place are also related to knowledge. So maybe instead of asking about what education can do in terms of bringing about knowledge that transforms a wrong in a right, we should be asking questions about what kinds of knowledge create the wrongs in the first place. And I think in that sense, education has much more potential to change things and to help people realize that if we're going to share a collective future, what we've been doing so far is not creating the conditions for this future to be a very peaceful one. So what I'm suggesting today is that instead of education putting in the minds of the children like the idea of be right, be non-violent, be peaceful, we should be trying to understand the conditions where violence and conflict, violent conflict and aggression occurs. And that's something that education can help people with so that they can later, or while they do that, try to create a different idea of the future, or a different idea of how to live together. So I'll start with 4 different perspectives about what's wrong with the world, and I'll invite you to think about what peace and peace education would mean for each of these perspectives so that we can understand the complexity of the issue at a different level. So the first perspective that we have here is that in relation to the problem, what's the problem in the world? That there is no problem, or that I only have time to think about the survival of my family, I don't have the time to think about the problem, or that the troublemakers, the evil people, are the problem. So the nature of the problem, according to this perspective, is that problems are caused by evil. Evil people, evil power, plotting revolution, plotting world domination. What should be done is that evil should be at least resisted and contained, and preferably it should be eliminated. And the idea of the world collective future is that we need a security, we need a future of security and order, with an absence of threat, anxiety, and conflict. So what I would like you to do now, what I would like to invite you to do now, is to think about, from this perspective, what would peace be and what would peace education look like? So if you want to stop the video now, it's a good time. From my perspective, peace in this imaginary is a peace of the righteous, right? So it's peace for me because I'm right. So everybody who's wrong should be incarcerated or taken away from my world. So it's a peace for some, not a peace for all, because I believe that my perspective is right and other people are wrong. Therefore, peace education would mean indoctrinating people or telling people about what's right, what's wrong, and trying to delegitimize the behavior of those who are deemed wrong. So trying to justify why we need punishment for those who are wrong, trying to justify why we need security, why we need to protect ourselves. This kind of peace education would be a peace based on force, a peace based on coercion. But nevertheless, these people who believe in these things still think it's a peace. It's a peace of themselves, as protected from those who are considered to be evil, who are considered to be on the other side of the fence and who need to be punished or incarcerated. Now, the next perspective is a little bit less strong in the sense of righteousness and arrogance. So the problem then is that if people are poor or if people are committing crimes, that's mainly their fault. It's their responsibility. They lack education, they lack culture, but certain individuals in power need to change too. So here there's an acknowledgement that the situation is not perfect. It's more blurred who's on the right side and who's on the wrong side. But people who are committing crimes and people who are creating conflict, that's mainly their fault. So the nature of the problem is that the attitudes and abilities of certain individuals need to change. So we need to curb certain behaviors. What to do is to make the present system work well in order to create harmony, tolerance, and equality of opportunity for all, so that rewards are shared according to merit. So include people in our worldview, include people in this idea of the future, in order to reach an end to insecurity and anxiety, so that we all agree to live together peacefully. Now, again, what do you think peace looks like, and what do you think peace education looks like from this perspective? So my response here is that peace would be still a one future, one view of what the future is, that we try to include others into. There are not many views of the future, there's just one, and that's the idea of peace, of everybody working, or everybody believing in the same thing and working together in agreement in this harmonious and stable society. Peace education then would be about tolerance, about an idea of equality that is conditional on people agreeing with this future, this idea of the future, and that we try to create opportunities, we try to address inequalities by creating opportunities for people to come into your own idea of society. Again, peace education then would be about the indoctrination into an idea of the future, into an idea of what peace looks like, into an idea of what is best for everybody else. that doesn't necessarily take into account the idea of other possible futures, of other possible societies. Now, the next one is a response, and it's a rejection of the ones that have been before. So people would see the problem as the oppressor. The oppressor is the problem, so there are the elites, corporations, capitalism, etc. The nature of the problem is that the oppressors would never give up power of their own free will. So if this oppression was created by history, only history can change the situation. What we need to do is sabotage from the inside or disengage from it altogether. And what for? In order to destroy the system. So it's a waste of time to speculate about a new system while the old system is still there. So again, try to think about what peace would look like and what peace education would be about. So what I would say about this scenario is that peace is again about us and them. So if they are the problems, they need to be eliminated, they need to be incarcerated or destroyed so that we can have our chance to create peace. Now, this is a response to other people in power trying to control what the future looks like or trying to impose their own ideas of things. So it's in a way, it's very subversive, it's very rebellious, and it's a response to coercive power or to military power, for example, here. So the idea here is that peace is the end of a situation of oppression rather than the creation of a utopia, of a future. And this kind of idea of peace can be found in many movements that are dealing with oppressive regimes. And it doesn't have to be just oppressive regimes that are physical, that use military or physical force, but also oppressive regimes that use cognitive forces that try to indoctrinate or manipulate people into believing one thing or the other. So this kind of response is very common when you have kind of indoctrination and oppression. Specifically, in education, we can see that being a response to the power of education to create a very singular idea of society, and we have a lot of rebellion when that happens, and at the same time that we have also a lot of conformity. And then we get a polarized debate between those who are right and those who are believed to be wrong, then who think they are right, and the others who are wrong. And we have a lot of antagonism and conflict in that sense. Let me just check if my camera is going to focus again. It's not focusing. Okay, come on, come on, come on, come on. See. Okay, now it's focused again. It's a new camera. Okay, so the next perspective, see if I can find it. No, it's here. The next perspective says that the problem is unequal benefits and losses, therefore injustice. Injustice is the problem. And the nature of the problem is the whole network of structures, assumptions, and attitudes which we inherit and learn from the past. What to do is to change ourselves and the structures towards greater equality of work, wealth, power, and esteem. And what for? For a never-ending self-critical development towards new power relations, new identities, new ways of living together, new and unimagined futures. Now, what would peace look like, and what would peace education look like? For me, this is the first perspective that opens up to an unimagined future. So peace in this sense is people working together to something they haven't defined yet, that they have to work together actually to define constantly, generation by generation, and even within generations. where you are not afraid of difference, of different opinions, because you're not trying to arrive somewhere at this stable idea of society and of peace with a dove and the rainbow. You know that there will always be difference, and this struggle for what is good, what is beautiful, what is better is always going to be there. But you are open to working with others and to understanding and learning from others, things that may change your ideas about things. So peace is about openness and about this idea of success in failure, of trying things out to learn from them, not to arrive at someone at a place, but to learn from these things so that we can apply this learning in our constant struggle to live better together or to relate better to each other. So peace education would be about opening up ourselves as teachers to our students in order to be able to open our students up to the world. So it's a process that starts from inside out. We start opening up ourselves, not only to our students, but to the world as well, to understanding the world differently, to balancing our own complexities, our feelings, our traumas, our past, our present, in order to create a future together. So it's not a perspective that has clear-cut answers that tells you this is what you have to do and it's going to work. It's a perspective that says that what we have experienced in the past, the mistakes we have been repeating in the past, they cannot sort out the problems that we're facing at the moment, because the solutions that come from this way of thinking are coming from the same way of thinking that created the problems in the first place. So instead of repeating the mistakes of the past, we need possibilities to make new mistakes and to make new mistakes together and to learn from these mistakes. So we need an attitude of openness to learn from each other and to learn from the mistakes we make. So what do we do in the classroom for that peace education? We expose our students to dilemmas, to conflicts. Of course, we don't create a conflict for them, but we create something called cognitive dissonance. Cognitive dissonance is something that challenges the way they think about things and forces them to go beyond their frames of reference, to expand and enlarge possibilities for thinking. So we bring a lot of dilemmas into the classroom. We invite them to engage with that, and then we open up discussions about questions of ethics, questions of politics, questions of relationality, and questions about what would make it sustainable to create a future where many people will participate together, in a future that never arrives at one place, that continues to improve as we learn from each other. So needless to say, I think this is the one idea of peace and peace education that I think, from my own perspective, is very fruitful and productive if we want to think about things differently in global education. Now, when we talk about peace and the idea of violence versus nonviolence, there are a lot of issues that need to be explored. And I'm going to talk a little bit about these issues and then about the situation in the classroom, so that we can relate things to the discussions that we've just had about peace and this idea of peace as an ongoing struggle, not as a place that you arrive at. So the first thing that I would like to talk about is the complexity of human beings. And it's very common to see the idea of humanity, of humanness, as something that is associated with good things. So if something good happens, like friendship, joy, compassion, we say, oh, this is really human. And when something bad happens, violence, a murder or something, we say that that's inhuman. Now, creating this dichotomy between what's human and what's inhuman relies on the assumption that humanity is only good, and whatever is inhuman, whatever is not good, is inhuman. That is very problematic because it doesn't acknowledge our own capacity to do good and to do things that are not good, depending on the circumstance. So what I'm suggesting here is that we rethink the idea of humanity as something much more complex. We think about our capacity to be both this mythical human being who's only good and associated with the heroes, they're heroes of history, but also our capacity to act in very violent and destructive ways, depending on the circumstance. And this is not to do so much with morality or what's good, but it's to do with our capacity. It's a description rather than an evaluation. We all have the capacity to do harm. We all have the capacity to sacrifice ourselves. We all have the capacity to be compassionate. We all have the capacity to be evil, to be jealous, to have envy. We all have the capacity for love. We all have the capacity for hatred. So if we don't have this idea of the complexity of the human being, we're going to be separating again those who are the good apples, those who are the bad apples. And we will tend to have the pattern. We will tend to say that the bad apples are always going to be bad apples and the good apples are always going to be good apples, when it's not necessarily like that. There's a very good book called Towards an Imperfect Education, and it's called Facing Humanity. I can't remember the rest of the title. It's by Sharon Todd, and it does deal with these issues. How do we teach in the classroom, understanding the complexity of the world and the complexity of our students and of our own selves, and the difficulties of dealing with issues of injustice. And I think her idea, Sharon Todd's idea, that we need to move from the idea that we need to cultivate the humanity in our students towards the idea that we need to help our students face humanity in all its goodness and all its problems and capacity for destruction, will actually help education move forward towards equipping people to live together better in the future and have the possibility then for peace. Now, as part of this dichotomy between human and inhuman, we have the dehumanization of others that is very much part of the justification of violence. And here I'd like to say that even good people who are supposed to be the human people, if put in specific situations where other people are constantly dehumanized, and sometimes they are dehumanized through education itself, like the case of Jewish people in Germany just before the Holocaust, they will be doing horrible things, thinking they are doing good things. So the idea of dehumanizing others is always a bad idea, because it will guarantee that even people who consider themselves to be good will be capable of doing horrible things if the others are not seen as fully human. And this has happened through history in a number of different ways. So even studying these cases is important for students to be able to figure out or to analyze and identify when dehumanization is taking place, so that we can understand that the implications of that can be and have been extremely dangerous. And in many cases, all genocides in the start of wars have started because of dehumanization. So this is one of the things to be really, really careful when dealing with issues of violence and nonviolence. The other thing that is important to think about, coming out of this idea of the bad apple and the good apple is that is it the individual that makes the decision only? And that's generally a view of certain people, that if the person is bad, the decisions are going to be bad. If the person is good, the decisions are going to be good. Or is it the environment and the situation that feed that kind of behavior? And that's a discussion about whether it's nature or whether it's culture that lead us to be good or not. And I think that's a problematic discussion, as I explained earlier, but it's important to recognize when we are analyzing situations of conflict, situations of injustice, when dehumanization is occurring, but also if bad decisions are being made, what kinds of situations are creating the conditions for those bad decisions to be made? What kinds of situations create the conditions for dehumanization? What kinds of situations bring in people hatred, envy, insecurity, and other characteristics that then lead them to make bad decisions? But also, it's very important to understand what kinds of configurations, what kinds of things create the situations that then lead to bad decisions to be made. So I'm talking here about 3 levels of analysis. So the analysis at a micro level is what kind of bad decision has been made, what kind of situation is creating a situation of violence. But then how is that situation constructed, and what constructs the possibility that this situation exists? These are 3 different levels where that I think it's important for us and for our students to be aware of and engaged with. So another important thing to think about when thinking about violence and nonviolence is the idea of justice in the question of anger. So what I'm suggesting here is that we cannot think about peace without thinking about the question of justice. Can there be justice without peace, or peace without justice? This is something that we need to engage with. And the idea of anger, too, is an interesting thing. I've heard it being compared to gasoline. So if you spread anger around yourself and ignite it, it can create a fire that is very difficult to control. But if anger is gasoline, it can also be put into an engine and propel the engine to do certain things, to move forward. So anger is not necessarily completely a bad thing in all circumstances. And it can be what fuels an engine of the work towards justice. But we need to analyze it in terms of the context, in which context we're talking about anger, in which context we're talking about justice, in the context of peace. Now, the article that I suggested for this module of Comandante Marcos of the Zapatista movement, it's a letter that he wrote as a response to letters he had received from school-age children questioning him why the indigenous people of Mexico were using violence in their resistance struggle. This letter is a very good example of that. So I do invite you to read the letter to see how questions about violence, justice, and anger cannot be seen as separate from the very different and complex contexts where they emerge. Another thing to think about is the limits of dialogue. It's very easy to say that if we all sat down together, we could talk about things and sort things out. So some people say that dialogue is the only way forward. And I do agree. It's a very important way to try to get people together to decide on what to do. However, there are limits to that. And these limits are related to what is possible to articulate. There's a limit also in terms of what we think we say and what the differences between what we think and what we say, and between what we think we do and what we actually do. So it's the limits of communication itself. And what I'd like to suggest here is that there are other ways beyond dialogue to get people together to create cultures of peace and nonviolence as well. And the last thing that I would like to talk about in this slide about violence and nonviolence is the issue of deference to authority and external validation. So some research shows that good people act in horrible ways in certain circumstances. And these circumstances are related to groupthink and seeing that authority is can be complicit in these horrible things. So here I think education comes in in a very interesting way, because from the beginning, when we are in nursery or preschool or primary school, we tend as teachers to create this need for external validation by saying good girl, good boy, and kind of conditioning the identities of the kids to feel good when they are showing conformity to what the group thinks. And it's fine in primary school. That's what we do. However, when they reach secondary school, we are not the main authority anymore. It's the group, their youth culture, that is the main authority. And that's where it gets extremely complicated. So what I'm suggesting here is that we need to be aware of these things and try to create from the beginning the idea that validation should be an interplay between group validation and self-validation, so that people can stand up to injustices, to bullying, and to other forms of harassment and violence without the need to feel good only when they are conforming to a situation, or the need to be accepted by other people. Now that takes me to the next slide, which is how all of this impacts the classroom. And I would like to start with Celia Elworthy's question that I think is very pertinent right now about how to stand up to a bully without becoming a thug. And this is a very pertinent question for the classroom itself, but also for the world. How do we deal with coercion, with the use of force, without ourselves having to use force and become coercive? So I would suggest that this is a question that is extremely interesting to explore in peace education and in teacher education, as it speaks to both contexts, the micro context of the classroom and the macro context of the world. But in the classroom, there's also a very recent phenomenon, which is cyberbullying. It's something that for people who are connected to the internet, especially young people, it's part of something they will have to deal with at some point if they are participating in forums. And classroom bullying, which has existed for a long time, but may be taking different forms with the incorporation of new technologies and with the rise of consumerism and competition in a youth culture that is very different from the culture that the teachers have been exposed to when they were young. So how do we deal with all of these things? So what I would say, the first thing is that it's important not to deny the problem or not to ignore the problem. The importance of education is to do with the ability of education to prepare people to face the issues they have to face. So the importance of preparedness, bring the issue to the classroom, both in terms of its macro level, so how understanding conflict and bullying in the world is important and has connections with what goes on in their own subcultures, in their own youth cultures, in their own peer groups. So making these connections is what I call facing violence out there and in here. Not only out there as in society and in my peer group, but out there outside of myself and inside. Looking at my own capacity again for hatred, for envy, for looking at my own insecurities. So it's part of education for peace to talk about and to offer ways to deal with the complexity of the individual. Then I think the idea of cultivating empathy and critical thinking are also very important. The questions, who decides, in whose name, for whose benefit, how come, where is this coming from, where is this leading to, how could this be different, are extremely important questions for analyzing global conflicts and global situations of inequality and local conflicts and situations of inequality. Now, there's also the issue of promoting the heroic imagination. When I talked about external validation, this is the antidote to that. So trying to prepare children to stand up and go against groupthink. This is very connected to the idea of dissenting thinking, and that's why it's important to promote the idea that difference is good, that different perspectives are actually quite good. As long as they are informed, responsible, and ethical, it's important to cultivate the possibility that at some point one of your students will have to take a very strong stance against injustice, against oppression, and go against the majority, and see that as something to be rewarded, not only by the group, but by an internal drive that you've just you have done the just and right thing. It's important also to bring to the classroom examples of nonviolence and restorative justice, not only through history. We have the most famous example as Gandhi, but in everyday life. So getting the stories of your local communities, of somebody who has done something against their own personal interests that benefited the majority, stories of sacrifice, and showing the children that the true heroes of our time are not the ones that appear in the newspaper only. They are living, they are neighbors, they are living normal lives, everyday lives, and they don't need to be in the newspaper to be a hero. And it's not the recognition of others that makes a hero, but the strong feeling from inside of having done something right and having done something that upholds principles of ethics, of justice, of solidarity with others. And then here I have different ideas of happiness, inner peace, and healing. This is a Buddhist idea of peace. And in their idea of peace, we need to observe how our mind works and what we think happiness is. So cultivating ideas of peace from other cultures and finding new ways of healing our historical and social traumas is extremely important in education for peace as well. So we're starting to discuss that in peace education, and which has in education, it has a history, but it's a history related much more to Western countries, and which is, of course, in the last probably 20, 30 years, has been opening up to different traditions. And one of your texts, the text that I suggested, deals with that. Satish Kumar is one of the most prominent peace educators of our time, and he's Indian. And he comes from a very different understanding of what peace looks like. And it starts from the individual outward rather than from the outside in. And it's important. But it's not just that. It's a connection between the two things. So I do recommend the text if you have a chance to read it. Now, I would like to end with two metaphors that I have found in the works of one. It's of poet Jackie Alexander, she talks about peace in a different way, and I'd like to offer that to you. And the other one came in a dream to me, so I'm going to put that forward as well. So first, Jackie Alexander. So she's from Trinidad and Tobago, and she says that since colonization has produced fragmentation and dismemberment at both the material and psychic levels, there's a yearning for wholeness, often expressed as a yearning to belong. A yearning that is both material and existential, both psychic and physical, in which, when satisfied, can subvert and ultimately displace the pain of dismemberment. So her metaphor is the metaphor of a body. So it's like we are together, all a body, not only the human beings, but all beings are a body. In dismemberment, when we try to say, this doesn't belong here, I don't want this arm, we create a situation where the body itself wants to be whole again. So we want each other, we need each other. And we are deeply hurting because we are separating ourselves. And getting together will heal this pain. However, because we feel this pain, we try to be together, but in smaller groups. So she suggests that strategies of membership in coalitions, like those of citizenship, community, family, political movement, nationalism, and solidarity in identity or ideology, although important, have probably not addressed the source of this yearning. For Alexander, these coalitions have reproduced the very fragmentation and separation that she identifies as the root of the problem. She states that the source of this yearning is a deep knowing that we are in fact interdependent, neither separate nor autonomous, not self-sufficient, but insufficient. So the idea here is that because we feel we need to be together, because we have been separated, we try to be together again in smaller groups. But the moment we form a group, we separate this group from others. So if we form a group of the Estonians, we are Estonians, not Finnish people, not Hungarians, not other things. And this is again a dismemberment that then reproduces the same thing that makes it hurt in the first place. Although this is important to form coalitions, this does not address the deep hurt that started in the first place with discrimination and colonialism. So she suggests that we should, instead of seeing ourselves as autonomous or separate, we should see ourselves as interdependent and insufficient. We need each other. She says, as human beings, we have a sacred connection to each other, and this is why enforced separations wreak havoc in our souls. There's a great danger then in living lives of segregation, racial segregation, segregation in politics, segregated frameworks, segregated and compartmentalized selves. What we have devised as an oppositional politics has been necessary, but it will never sustain us. For a while, it may give us some temporary gains, which become more ephemeral the greater the threat, which is not a reason not to fight. It can never ultimately feed that deep place within us, that space of the erotic, that space of the soul, that space of the divine. And here is where I think, when we talk about dialogue as the only way, we are probably missing out on other ways that can, other possibilities of bringing people together through the arts, through, I'm not going to say religion, but through spirituality, through the belief in this mystery. We cannot have an objective answer to existential questions. Therefore, there's a mystery. And if we see our own answers as stories only, not as the truth that solves the mystery, we may get together and see that there's a variety of different stories. And what unites us really is that we can never sort out the mystery, not even with all the stories. But if we have stories, then in the stories that are the stories that guide our lives, we can learn from each other. We can learn to listen to other stories and try to change the stories that we have so that we can have a collective future where there's not only one story that is going to be imposed on everybody else. That's why I think Alexander's work is extremely important in that direction for peace education. Now I'm going to leave you with my own questions in relation to this. So, what if racism, sexism, classism, nationalism, and other forms of toxic, parasitic, and highly contagious viral divisions are preventable social diseases? What if the medicine involves getting to terms with our violent histories, learning to see through the eyes of others, as impossible as it sounds, and facing humanity in our own selves first, in all its complexity, agonism, and imperfection, agonistically embracing everyone's capacity for love, hatred, compassion, harm, goodwill, envy, joy, anger, oppression, care, selfishness, selflessness, avarice, kindness, enmity, solidarity, malice, benevolence, arrogance, humility, narcissism, altruism, greed, generosity, contempt, and reverence. What if our holy texts, both religious, activist, and academic, our education, both formal and informal, our politics and agency, and our ways of knowing and being have carried out both the mutant virus that spreads the disease and the medicine that cures and prevents it? What if learning to distinguish between toxins, viruses, and medicines involves disciplining our minds, bodies, psyches, and spirits by confronting our traumas and letting go of fears of scarcity, loneliness, worthlessness, and guilt generated precisely by the imperative for autonomy or independence, self-sufficiency, and control? What if we have to learn to trust each other without guarantees? What if the motivation to survive alongside each other in our finite planet in dynamic balance without written agreements, coercive enforcements, or assurances will come precisely through learning collectively from and with the disease itself? What would global education for peace look like then? So I'll leave you with this thought, and I hope you're going to have a good discussion after this stimulus. Thank you.